When you also look at some of the player personnel items, I know you mentioned Diego Costa, who never caused controversy with anything that he did.
Mm-mm.
What was the sense? You mentioned, in the writing, he kind of talked about the situation, what he tried to do. Could you talk a little bit more, elaborate on the tone that he had as he was telling his side of the story and how that came across to you?
Yeah, like I say, it was interesting because his first thought was to make it clear that he didn't want to make anything worse between himself and Costa. He didn't want to attack him. He wanted to make it clear that they should remember the year when they won the league together. And in actual fact, in Conte's head, the reason Conte doesn't feel there was anything wrong with his text message that he sent to Costa, because in his head, the player had made it clear for a whole season that he wanted to move. Chelsea had said, no, we want you for this season because we're going to win the league and we need you to win the league. They had an argument within that season, if you remember, when I think there was a blow up in the car park at the training ground when Costa in the January tried to get out to China. But again, they diffused that situation and got on with it. And I think in Conte's mind, and I sort of have sympathy with him on this, he just got to the stage where, look, we managed it for a season. We won the league together. If you want to go, go. You're not going to be part of my plans now because I can't have another season of you just asking to leave every 5 minutes and in January trying to force your way out. So he didn't feel his text message was dropping any sort of bomb. He just felt it was thanks for the season we've had together. Good luck. You're not part of my plans. Go and find a move. And his opinion is that Costa used that, but his tone was very conciliatory. His tone was just kind of, this is what happens. We won the league together. We split. Fine. But he was very firm on what the truth was in terms of Costa pushing to go for that year. It was not Chelsea or Conte initially trying to force Costa out the door. It was very much the other way around.
I mean, look, Diego Costa was a ball of energy, and it was all about pointing that energy in the right direction from a managerial standpoint. And Conte did a great job, but it's true. I'd forgotten stuff because at the end, right, you only remember the last thing they did. And the last thing that happened was Diego Costa shacking up in Brazil, refusing to show up, and it was all about a text message. And that was like a great PR move on his point. They held on to that text message, and they're like, this is ridiculous. Like, you won't even tell us in person. Like, how can you treat us like this? And it worked to his point. But you're right. Diego Costa wanted to go to China. He wanted to go to Atletico Madrid. Then he wanted to go back to, it was a bit of a saga. So I think that it is good to remember maybe the full picture because the end was a mess. And it probably hurt that next season we just missed him so bad. I mean, even probably for a couple seasons, it was like the era post Diego Costa. We're like, oh, if only we had a striker again like Diego Costa. If only we had a striker who celebrates with a fire extinguisher in the middle of a press conference after winning the league at West Brom away. If only.
But again, you forget that in the back end, after the January, when he tried to get out to China, even though they won the title, he really didn't have a good second half of that season. His great form was in the first half of the season, and then his kind of head went. He tried to go to China. The relationship with him and Conte exploded in that car park. They tried to manage it, but his head really went. He didn't score that many goals in that second half of the season after the January. And Conte would have seen that this guy is probably going to be useless to me next season. He might not have still even come back from Brazil anyway if they hadn't have sold him. That was probably, I think it's fair to speculate, that was a move they were already thinking about sort of pulling anyway. So, I mean, it was crazy times. It was great 2 years with Conte because so much went on.
Well, one of the other things, just as we kind of wrap on the signings piece, so he gets in Morata, he brings in Bakayoko, he gets Danny Drinkwater, and, Antonio Rudiger comes in that season, Zappa Costa. it's a pretty interesting window. Did he have anything else to say on just the signings that did happen as a knock-on effect of not getting the players he wanted? You know, you go from Van Dijk and Lukaku to Morata and Rudiger. What was his maybe expression on just like the getting transfers that he wants and how important that is or isn't to him?
Yeah, he was reluctant to get into transfers that maybe he didn't want. He would speak about transfers he did want. He spoke about the fact that he got in Alonso and people in the club were unsure about Alonso because he'd been playing for Fiorentina. He likes to take credit for N'Golo Kante. I know there are people at Chelsea who would dispute that slightly.
I would love to take credit for N'Golo Kante. Yeah, exactly. He's amazing. Can I get a percent?
So he was happy to talk about Les. When I tried to push him on the sort of alternative players that came in and whether he really wanted them or whether they were forced upon him, he was a lot more reluctant to talk about that. And I think he saw the danger signs in terms of how that might look from the outside. And he was careful not to let the piece stray into it becoming him battling with the club again. Mm-hmm. He didn't want that. And that's where I think he veered away from a few of those questions. But I did try, I promise you, but that's probably the one area I didn't get very far with him.
I mean, you mentioned, because it's kind of all circles around his 2 seasons being 2 of the most dynamic, interesting, kind of at odds seasons that Chelsea has experienced in recent memory, right? You have the glorious highs and then the kind of following year plateau and then fall off. But he was interested at least to talk about legacy with you, which I thought was interesting, because I think because the fire burned so bright, you know, a lot of Chelsea fans still regard him as you know, and the title winning season is one of their favorite ever. So he talked about being happy with his legacy, winning the title, reaching the FA Cup final in the first year, winning it in the second, transitioning to the back three, all of these things that kind of became popular. And he honestly did trend set in that first year with some of the play style. Given the, you know, kind of the acrimonious split at the end, you know, how do you feel like this sense of legacy will be viewed by fans, you know, after his comments? Because it kind of struck me as a unique tone.
Yeah, it is. It's really interesting because it's a really tough split, because there are still a lot of Chelsea fans who kind of love him. You know, they react to everything that he sort of says and does, and reminiscing on that time with really a lot of affection. And then there's some who are quite dismissive of what happened in the second season, and quite sort of dismissive of the fact that they won't let the Costa text go. I mean, I get a lot of that reaction from people that, you know, he messed it up with the Costa text. And I think that's far too simplistic, really. I don't really think that's a massive part of why things went wrong, if I'm honest with you. I think it's why they got into one situation with Costa, but I think there was a lot more going on than simply that text. So yeah, I just find it like all managers, they really split opinion. There's still a lot of fondness though for him. He was so proud of this 3 at the back, because what he argues on why he's so proud of bringing his 3 at the back and the legacy is he doesn't argue that he was the first ever person in English football to do it, because he clearly wasn't. But he believes that he was the first person in English football to do it in a way that allows the big clubs to do it without being criticised. So previously, if you played 3 at the back, people would only accept it if you were a club near the bottom and you were trying to just keep out goals and you were just trying to play for 0-0s or nick 1-0s. And that big clubs weren't allowed to do it because it was seen as a negative tactic. And he's proud of the fact that he proved that it could be a positive tactic, and it enabled big clubs to do it and people to understand that it was a good tactic. And England, you know, funnily enough, talk about big clubs in Premier League doing it. The club that have probably stolen it the most, the team that's stolen it the most is England in the last few years. You know, we used it in Russia at the World Cup, and we've gone back to it, and we've even put Kyle Walker in the Aspilicueta position. You know, we've really kind of ripped it off. And I thought it was funny because he says, you know, he's always looking for ideas from other coaches to rob, as he put it. He was quite unashamed that, you know, if he sees something someone else is doing that's good, he'll try and steal it. So, yeah, it was, his legacy was interesting. He definitely feels like he's got unfinished business in England. I mean, he was at pains to stress, and he had to because there was an Inter Milan press officer sat next to him, that he's happy at Inter Milan. But he wants to get back, you know, not soon, but not in the distant future either. He wants to get back and have another go, because I think he thinks that the scale of his achievement in his first season has been slightly overshadowed by the rows that followed. And I think he wants to show that he's not a one-trick pony, that it wasn't a one-off, that he can come and do it again, and that he can dominate again. And he does genuinely love England. He stayed living in Cobham for probably a good year or so after he got sacked, which was probably quite awkward because in Cobham it's such a small place, you'd bump into everybody all the time.